Though the Silk Road and spice routes are sometimes looked upon as the initiators of globalization, true globalization started during the Age of Discovery, that is the 15th to the 18th centuries. It was during this period that European explorers connected East and West and accidentally discovered the Americas. Welcome to the Why in History. I am Ajay Kaul, and today we take a look at the history of globalization, its impact, and where it is headed. So, what factors led to the Age of Discovery and globalization? It's a mix of economic, technological, and political factors. Economic, because Europe wanted to control the spice trade, which till then was a monopoly of the Middle Eastern and Mediterranean powers. But the main factor was the technological advancement, mainly in the field of shipbuilding and navigation. The ships became more sturdy and hence a lot more seaworthy, and there were additional tools like the astrolabe and quadrant, which supplemented the navigational ability of the magnetic compass. So sailors could now take on more challenging and longer trips across the globe. And politically, across Europe, there was a competition to discover and control the trade routes. Essentially, Europe was trying to get more wealthy, and this led to a fierce competition between countries like Portugal, Spain, England, France, and the Netherlands. So as the ships sailed with the purpose of discovering new worlds, 3 voyages are of key importance during this era. The first was Christopher Columbus and his discovery of the Americas. In 1492, Christopher Columbus, who was Italian by birth, sailed under the Spanish flag with the goal of finding a westward route to Asia. But instead, he stumbled upon the islands of the Caribbean, marking the first European contact with the Americas. In the 1492 expedition, he landed in the Bahamas, and subsequently in 1493, 1498, and 1502, he expanded his discoveries to other islands such as Puerto Rico, Jamaica, and Trinidad. And just to be clear, Christopher Columbus did not land in what is now mainland United States of America. And Christopher Columbus's expeditions are important because they laid the foundation for the colonization of the Americas, which led to a global exchange of plants, animals, cultures, which had a lasting impact on global trade and economy. It is also important to acknowledge the cultural clashes Columbus had with the indigenous people, which led to devastating consequences for the Native American populations. The second consequential voyage during this period is that of Portugal's Vasco da Gama towards finding a sea route to India. In July of 1497, Vasco da Gama set sail from Lisbon with 4 ships, and after a challenging and perilous journey, he successfully rounded the Cape of Good Hope in 1498, continuing up the eastern coast of Africa, eventually reaching the port of Calicut on the southwestern coast of India. And this marked the first direct sea route from Europe to Asia and had a profound impact on global trade. The third voyage to have an impact on globalization during this era was from another Portuguese explorer sailing under the Spanish flag, Ferdinand Magellan. In 1519, Magellan set sail from Seville with 5 ships with the purpose of finding a westward route to the Spice Islands of Southeast Asia. Magellan did not live to see the completion of the journey, but his expedition was key in discovering the globe and proving that it was possible to sail around the world. And one of the key discoveries was the Strait of Magellan, a navigable sea route in southern Chile connecting the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. This was an extremely treacherous journey, and the last surviving ship, the Victoria, eventually completed the circumnavigation in 1522 under the command of Juan Sebastian Elcano. The key impact of this expedition was the expansion of European knowledge of world geography, specifically related to the size of the globe and the interconnectedness. So between Portugal, Spain, England, France, and the Netherlands, a new competition started with respect to territorial acquisition and economic supremacy. Portugal positioned itself as a major player in the spice trade with a network of trading posts and colonies in Africa, Asia, and South America. The discoveries of Christopher Columbus were followed by the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, and this gave Spain an exclusive control over much of the Americas. And subsequently, Spain undertook expeditions that led to the conquest of powerful indigenous empires in the Americas, such as the Aztecs and the Incas. Subsequently, England, France, and the Netherlands entered the fray, with the English exploring the North American coast, while the French ventured into Canada, and the Dutch East India and the West India companies established Dutch colonies in Asia, Africa, and the Americas. And this intense competition for colonies during the Age of Discovery laid the groundwork for the establishment of vast overseas empires. This led to a new global power dynamic and set the stage for centuries of imperial expansion and influence. For the first time, new maritime routes opened up global trade networks connecting distant regions and facilitating the trade of goods, culture, and ideas. Because they controlled the trade routes, the European powers got easy access to valuable resources, raw materials, and markets, and as a result, they started gaining in economic wealth. With the discovery of the Americas, two biologically distinct worlds were brought into contact, and this process, which led to the exchange of human, animal, plant, and bacterial life between Europe and the Americas, came to be known as the Columbian Exchange. And one of the lasting impacts within the Columbian Exchange was the exchange of plants and crops between the two regions. And one of the most impactful and revolutionary crops to be discovered by the Europeans was corn, discovered by Christopher Columbus in 1493 during his excursion in the Caribbean. With corn making its way to Asia, Europe, and Africa, there was a significant impact on population growth and famine resistance in parts of China and Europe. And this was primarily because it grew in places unsuitable for tubers and grains, and sometimes yielded 2 to 3 harvests a year. And besides feeding humans, it also fed livestock. The potato, discovered in the Andes, was another food item that made it to Europe, Asia, and Africa. Farmers in various parts of East and South Asia adopted it, which improved agricultural returns in cool and mountainous districts. But the strongest impact came in Northern Europe, where ecological conditions suited its requirements even at low elevations. From central Russia across to the British Isles, its adoption between 1700 and 1900 improved nutrition, checked famine, and led to a sustained bout of demographic growth. The most disastrous aspect of the Columbian Exchange was the introduction of infectious diseases into the Americas. Before 1492, Native Americans had not been exposed to any of the acute infectious diseases in Eurasia and Africa that included measles, smallpox, influenza, mumps, typhus, and whooping cough. But after 1492, these infectious diseases spread as epidemics among the Native American populations, leading to massive death tolls. The impact was most severe in the Caribbean, where by 1600, Native American populations on most islands had plummeted by more than 99%. Across the Americas, populations fell by 50% to 95% by 1650. And this disease component of the Columbian Exchange was mostly one-sided. Barring syphilis and tuberculosis, which were supposed to have been prevalent in the Americas, the rest of the diseases came in to the Americas from the European explorers and invaders. So, with the opening up of trade routes and discovery of new regions and markets across the globe, a more robust financial infrastructure was required to fund this explosive growth. And this led to the world's first stock exchange opening up in the Netherlands, the Amsterdam Stock Exchange in 1602. Its primary objective was to trade in the shares of the Dutch East India Company, which at that time were the first publicly traded securities in the world. And this transitions us into the first golden age of globalization, which is the period lasting from 1870 to the beginning of World War I. The Industrial Revolution provided the essential technologies and the stimuli for the formation of a global division of labor and a global trade network. But the three foundational elements of this wave were capital, trade, and migration. And when it came to capital, there was a concerted effort during the golden age of globalization to come up with various international monetary systems and unions. And the most famous and popular among them was the gold standard. In the early 19th century, most countries were supporting a bimetallic standard, that is both gold and silver coins, as a medium of exchange. Among certain realms, such as the German states, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Scandinavian nations, Russia, and some Asian countries, the silver standard was being used. Britain was the only country where, beginning in the 19th century, the gold standard was used. However, in the second half of the 19th century, bimetallic systems gradually started to disappear one after the other. In 1873, Germany became the first continental country to switch to the gold standard. Denmark, Sweden, Norway, the Netherlands, and some countries of the Latin Monetary Union followed suit, and in 1879, the United States also joined the gold standard. The gold standard did not mean that transactions were being conducted in gold, but what it meant was that the paper currency being used for transactions was backed by gold reserves. So essentially, gold was the exchange rate across currencies, and this enabled capital to flow across the globe. And global capital flows took one of the four following forms. They were either credits to foreign governments, loans to private individuals, corporate stocks and bonds held by foreigners, or direct investment by European firms in other countries. The largest exporter of capital during the late 19th and early 20th centuries was Great Britain. At peak, the British share of global capital was an enormous 80%, and no wonder it was called the world's banker at that time. This boost in foreign investment brought about a massive increase in global exports during the 19th century. In the early part of the 19th century, the volume of global exports equaled between 1 and 2% of global economic production. By 1850, this had increased to 5%, and by 1880, it stood at 10%. The volume of global exports stabilized around 12% by the time of the First World War. On the technological side, this boost in global trade was propelled by a massive expansion of global networks of railways and seaways, which dramatically lowered the cost of transporting goods and made long-distance trade in consumption goods and raw materials profitable. One of the key developments of the 19th century was the emergence of the multinational corporation, or the MNC. An MNC is a firm that extends itself over borders to do business outside of its headquarters country. Here, the American companies became the pioneers and started setting up offices in Canada, Europe, and Latin America. Within continental Europe, Germany led the field with the emergence of MNCs, with companies like Siemens making its first investment in UK in 1858. Besides the UK, US, and Germany, other countries in Europe too had set up MNCs, like Switzerland's Nestle, Italy's Fiat Motor Company, and the Royal Dutch Petroleum Company of the Netherlands. As the global trade and production grew, the demand for labor also increased exponentially. And this led to migration within and outside the continents. There were the donor countries, which had a growth in population but lower wage levels. And there were the recipient countries, which had high wage levels, less population, and a booming trade and industrial infrastructure. Between 1820 and 1940, a total of 60 million people migrated to the Americas, with a majority going to the US and the rest distributing across Argentina, Canada, Brazil, and other South American nations. The majority of migrants to these countries were of European origin, though about 3 million people came from India, China, Japan, and Africa. And that brings us to the second golden age of globalization that happened post-World War II. But the period between and including the two world wars is one marked with anti-globalization and the rise of nationalism. But soon after World War I, there was a concerted effort to reinitiate the globalization that existed prior to the war. But these efforts failed, and the world ended up getting divided into extreme militant dictatorships with a heavy nationalistic bent of mind versus the traditional democracies. But before the end of World War II, a concerted effort was made to create a new world order focused on financial integration and trade without barriers across the globe. And this culminated in the adoption of the Bretton Woods Charter in 1944, which was formulated by US Treasury official Harry Dexter White and British economist John Maynard Keynes. The key difference post-World War II was that the United States took a lead role in getting the world together and establishing global financial institutions like the World Bank and the IMF. A key element of this era of globalization post-World War II was the movement of goods and services. While the era of discovery was focused on discovering what was available where and setting up a trading infrastructure for these goods, the subsequent eras, built on the backbone of the Industrial Revolution, moved raw materials from their source to the location of the ultimate factory before sending the finished product across the globe. And built upon the backbone of colonialism, these eras of globalization were characterized by an increasing economic disparity between the raw material producing nations and the finished goods manufacturing ones. However, in Globalization 4.0, which is the current era of globalization, the concept of raw material producing versus finished goods manufacturing has virtually gone away, with the entire manufacturing cycle concentrated within a few countries, mainly China. Factories have virtually moved from the industrialized Western nations to China and East Asia. With global transportation costs no longer a big factor, that region virtually is supplying products to the rest of the world. But free and open trade would not have been possible without the one organization which was set up in 1948, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GATT. GATT became the international organization which set the framework for global free trade, particularly via a reduction in industrial tariffs. In 1995, GATT became the World Trade Organization, or the WTO. And with the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the third phase of globalization started as several countries started getting rid of their trade barriers and joining the WTO. After 15 years of negotiations, China officially joined the WTO in December of 2001. In the year 2023, the exports of goods and services represented approximately 30% of the global GDP. And on that note, we end this section of the program. On to the quiz section. Question from the previous episode. What percent of global trade passes through the Panama Canal? Approximately 5% of global trade is estimated to pass through the Panama Canal annually. And by contrast, approximately 12 to 15% of global trade passes through the Suez Canal. So the answer is B, 5%. Question for the current episode. Who was the USA's first multinational corporation? Was it A, Standard Oil, B, Ford Motor Company, C, Singer, or D, Westinghouse? Once again, which company was the first American MNC? Was it A, Standard Oil, B, Ford Motor Company, C, Singer, or D, Westinghouse? The answer will be provided in the next episode. That's all we have in the current episode. We'll be back again in 2 weeks with another exciting and informative episode on world history. In the meantime, if you're interested in any specific topic being covered on this podcast, please reach out to me via my website, ajaykaul.com. That is AJAYKAUL.com via the contact button. Till then, stay safe and keep exploring the why in history.